either one of the two pumps on the boat is bad, or this hose right here might have a crack in it. It's really hard to get to. But this small rubber hose running back in here might have a crack, might be pulling in air. So water's not getting from here, and it's not making its way up through this hose here, which goes into this water manifold. This is a bleeder screw. It's just air coming out of there. I primed the pump several times, but it can never maintain pressure in there. So there's a pump right back. This is the water pump. I think when you pull this off, I think there's like a rubber piece that actually, it's like a rubber impeller inside there, and they're pretty easy to change. I think either that is bad or there's a leak in that line down by the outdrive. You're gonna need, I think this was another problem we were having. This is the distributor cap. I would just buy a new one. It was dirty and it was causing no spark into the spark plugs. I took all the spark plugs off and cleaned them and gapped them. They're fine. I borrowed the coil from my boat just to make sure it wasn't the coil. So I'm going to swap it back out with the old coil. But I believe your coil is probably okay, but I just in case swapped it out with mine. But I'm going to put it back. This is the electronic choke. Power should be going to this cable, which will turn a little spring inside here. This can turn one way or the other, and there's notches up top. I don't know what the spec for this boat is, but this one of these notches has to line up with one of these notches up top, and I had to turn that to get the boat to run good. Yeah, I changed these cables just in case it was the cables. And there's the fuel pump. I took it off and turned it upside down, and now it's pumping fuel fine. But I had to really rig it up to get these fuel lines run. So I got your original tube running here, then it comes down, and I had to clamp on a rubber hose to get it to mate with another tube that I had, which runs all the way up to the carburetor. So it works the way it is, but this rubber hose may deteriorate over time. And then your fuel source hose coming from here, this is going straight to your gas tank. I've got you plugged right in there. Right here. I had to use a tube that I had laying around, and it had a little hole in it, so I had to plug it with a little nail. But you can see that there's fuel in here now. When you're running, you'll see fuel going through, but that might all need to be changed. And this fuel pump, I mean, it's working, but you may have to, I don't know if that's the way it's supposed to be stocked, because you can see it comes up pretty hard up against the motor here, and then I had to turn this fitting around to be able to get a line run to it. I mean, and this hose is like maxed out. I can barely fit it up, but I think that's just a vent tube that goes to the carb. Not very important, but I think some of the excess gases that build up in here make their way back down to the fuel pump and get reused, so it's just for efficiency, but it's maxed out with the length. I did a rudimentary check on timing, on the timing of the motor, and it looked like it was pretty close. Right here it says that it's 8 degrees before top dead center, and it looked pretty close, but that really depends on what idle speed you're running. And it should be advancing timing as you're speeding up, but there was no power to the tachometer, so I couldn't tell what idle speed that we were going. And that the reason it wasn't starting was just like you said, there's power. There's a power board back there, and I just had to clean the fuses. So that power strip right there, I ended up having to take this fuse out, and I cleaned it with sandpaper and cleaned the connections on it. But this is your source power going into this whole strip, and then these are all feeding from it. So this is your source from your battery, power source, and then all your fuses. And if power's not getting from here to here, then none of these will work. So I found out when I was turning the key and I jiggled that fuse and it started working. And also, you can jump it. You can take this right off and touch it to here, and you're activating this. And since this runs to your ignition right there, it actually started trying to turn over. So that's when I realized that it was just dirty connection from here to here, because that fuse is still good. Now there should be power going to this side of the coil here. When you have power, when you have the key turned in the on position but not starting, one of these wires is supposed to be supplying this side of the coil with power, and apparently it's not, because it will never run unless there's power going to this side of the coil. So that's where I was plugging this. I'm just jumping from the positive lead to the battery, or from the battery to this side of the coil, and it will run only when you do that. But if you can figure out where the connection is bad for one of these wires going to this coil, you won't have to jump it. And in fact, if you leave a jumper wire onto the cable, for an extended period of time, it will fry this coil. So it's good enough just to get it running and stuff, but you got to remember to unplug it when you're done. But it shouldn't be too hard to trace this wire, one of these wires, back and figure out why you're not getting power. It's most likely up there at the fuse board. Probably just a dirty connection you'll have to sandpaper down. But I would recommend getting an ohm meter, and you can hook it all up and then have it facing you when you're up underneath there, and you can just play around until you see voltage, and then you'll figure out which one was bad. But they're all color coded, so you might just be able to clean it and try it, and clean it and try it. But anyways, yeah, so get the spec on that. Iron out why water's not cooling the engine. It's either the water pump or a crack in one of these water lines. And same thing with the tachometer, probably just needs a clean connection. But once you get the tachometer running, you can figure out more specs on what idle speed it's supposed to run, and tweak the carburetor to get the right idle speed, tweak your choke to get the right idle speed. I think there's a fine balance. And then you can time it, and then you can work on timing advance, which it's supposed to advance timing when you're speeding up. And if it's not doing that, you will have about half the power that you should. I think it is doing it, though. It seems like it's running pretty strong. I'm not sure how this engine advances timing. I can't figure it out just from looking at it. And you would need to read about that. And I'm not sure if this is supposed to apply, this wire is supposed to have voltage enough to apply choke upon startup, but then release choke when it's no longer needed. I don't know if that's working. Again, that's another connection issue, probably at the fuse board. I do not believe your alternator is working. I've checked it while it's running. You should be getting more than your battery's voltage while it's running. And I'm checking all around on these wires and stuff, and I'm not seeing anything higher than 12 volts. It should be like around 13 to 14, I think, when this is running, and it's not. So I think your alternator's bad. Unless there's another post I'm not seeing somewhere that should be running. And I think that it's this orange wire. I think this orange wire runs to the starter and makes its way, and from the starter makes its way back to this red cord, which makes to your battery, and charges your battery. I think that there's supposed to be that higher voltage is supposed to be coming out of that post, but it's not. So I think your alternator's bad. Which it looks like a pretty cheap, simple alternator, so it shouldn't be too bad. And I didn't check any of the fluids or anything else, but anyways, here's the engine running. Oh yeah. Plug in 12 volts to the positive side of the coil, and I'm gonna start it. Up to the high end, you pretty much got to shut it off. I'm only pouring water into this fluid back down so you can get it. It'll run pretty good. If you loosen these screws, you can make your adjustments. These two screws, you can make adjustments on them. So I put it right in where I think it's the middle, and it runs good there, but I'm sure that there's a spec for that, and it's supposed to be in a certain spot. I would also run carb cleaner here and here, if not take it completely carb clean it. That's pretty much all I can tell about the boat. I didn't check any of the other electrical